Hello, welcome to the sideboard here at Grand Prix Charlotte. I am Nick Miller alongside two-time Grand Prix champion Brian Braun-Duin. How you doing, sir?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good. Now, we've seen you brew on this collected company Abzan deck for a while.
Correct.
And you've seen the different iterations, but you've come to the just full-on combo version this weekend. And I'd like to kind of hear your explanation on, why this build of the deck is correct and, why the format requires this.
Yeah, so I've tried a lot of different versions of Collected Company, a variety of fair versions of the deck, a variety of like half combo, half fair versions,
Sure.
And then this one's just really all in on the combo for the most part. And the reason I feel like this is the best fit for Modern is because Modern's a format where everyone's doing something super powerful and proactive, and sometimes the only way to beat that is to do that yourself. And there's a definite problem for being too fair in Modern.
Right.
And all of the fair Collected Company decks, sometimes you just lose to like a cranial plating on an on a Etched Champion, and you just don't have a way to beat it. Whereas this deck, at least, you still have the ability to gain infinite life or deal infinite damage and win that way.
So if people are doing unfair things, you're looking to just do your combo more consistently and faster than they are.
Right.
Your early versions had, like you said, just value creatures. You had like Fulminators in the main or Tidehuller Sculler in the main, all these value-oriented creatures. Now you've cut it down the numbers. You're just running a bunch of mana creatures between Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarch, Wall of Roots, and then a bunch of copies of your combo pieces, which of course is Anafenza, Kintree Spirit, Melira, Kitchen Finks, Murderous Redcap, and Viscera Seer.
Right.
Talk about all the little nuances and the separate combos you can do with all these pieces.
Yeah, so there's really 4 combos in the deck. There is Viscera Seer plus Kitchen Finks, and then either Anafenza or Melira. That gives you infinite life. That same combo with Redcap instead of Kitchen Finks is infinite damage. And then if you have both Melira and Anafenza in play at the same time, with a Kitchen Finks and a Viscera Seer, in addition to gaining infinite life, you can also bolster infinite times onto your creatures. And then if you have Anafenza and Melira, you can play a Murderous Redcap and shoot the Redcap over and over again, and also produce infinite bolsters that way. You don't gain life, but you do get to grow your team arbitrarily large.
Now break down how these work for someone that might not be familiar with the actual interactions, because you're going over, you have these bolsters and you have these scry triggers and all this stuff. Kind of break down how that actually plays out.
So the most common combo is Viscera Seer, Kitchen Finks, and either Melira or Anafenza. What happens is you sacrifice Kitchen Finks to the Viscera Seer, and then it persists and comes back into play. And if you have a Melira in play, it can't get a -1/-1 counter. So you're going to gain 2 life, and it's basically just going to be a fresh Kitchen Finks, and you can just keep repeating that process, gaining 2 life each time. With Anafenza in play, it's exactly identical, except it does come into play with a -1/-1 counter, but you get to bolster with Anafenza, and since 1 toughness is always going to be your smallest creature, you can always bolster onto the Kitchen Finks. +1/+1 and -1/-1 counters cancel out, so you reset the Finks that way.
Right.
With the infinite bolster combo, what happens is you sacrifice your Kitchen Finks, it's going to come back into play. It doesn't have a -1/-1 counter because of Melira, and because of Anafenza, you still get a bolster trigger. So you leave that bolster trigger on the stack, sacrifice Kitchen Finks again, comes back into play, you get another bolster trigger, you leave it on the stack, you sacrifice it again, you keep repeating that process, and eventually you just get an infinite amount of bolster triggers on the stack. Once it's all said and done, you just let them all resolve, and they kind of just spread up through your creatures, and they just kind of all grow giant.
Now, thankfully, in Paper Magic, you get to do and represent the loop, allowing your creatures to do this. In Magic Online, we've seen people, they have to go through all the loops. They only end up gaining like 80 life or something, and
Yeah, I had to win a game yesterday where I needed a 1/2 Birds of Paradise to turn into a 17 power Birds of Paradise, and I calculated that I needed Murderous Redcap to shoot itself 86 times. So I was 60 something into the loop, and my opponent conceded. But that is the danger of playing the deck on Magic Online. It's a lot harder than it is in real life, where you can just say, I'm going to do this 8 million times.
Right. All right, and then the deck also has a slew of value creatures still. You have Voice of Resurgence, one of my favorites, Eternal Witness, which allows you to buy back the pieces. And then, of course, Collected Company and Court of Calling are there to help you set these pieces up.
Yeah, so with the exception of Linvala and Murderous Redcap, every creature in the deck costs 3 or less mana. So there's 28 creatures to hit off a Collected Company, so you're going to hit fairly frequently. And it's not even that bad if you hit a lot of your mana creatures, because those will turn on your Court of Callings as well. So there's a lot of inherent synergy there as well. And yeah, there's between Collected Company and Court, it's really easy to find creatures you're missing. Sometimes you might start a turn with like just a Birds of Paradise in play, and 2 turns later you have 6 creatures in your combo killing your opponent.
Right. Then of course you have some bullets here. You have a Spell Skite.
Yep.
Great against Twin and things like that. In fact, Scavenging Ooze, which has been like the major player in beating the Jund decks, correct?
Yeah, Scavenging Ooze is just a really good value creature against decks like Jund and Abzan. It's also the second best creature in the mirror. Against other decks like this, Scavenging Ooze can actually interrupt the combo by exiling either Kitchen Finks or Murderous Redcap with the Persist on the stack.
Sure.
So you can't combo through an opponent's Scavenging Ooze, and so your own Scavenging Oozes are going to be really important if you happen to play against the mirror match.
Okay. You got a Fiend Hunter here, which can just be a tutorable removal spell.
Yes.
And a Linvala, where you just shuts down all kinds of things once you really start thinking about the implications.
Yeah, Linvala seems innocuous, but it actually shuts down a lot of things. It's really great in the mirror. It shuts down all the mana creatures and all the combo pieces. It's actually good against Jund and Abzan because it shuts down cards like Scavenging Ooze, Grim Lavamancer, Olivia Voldaren. Plus it's just a giant beefy flyer that doesn't die to Decay or Lightning Bolt.
Right.
And then it's also great against a deck like Affinity because it shuts out Arcbound Ravager and Steel Overseer, 2 of their best cards.
Yeah, so many little implications that you don't quite notice on the surface, but they're very good.
Yep.
Now notice the thing in your deck, a lot of people try to fit stuff like Path to Exile or Thoughtseize into the main deck of this kind of deck. You have taken all of those out for just creatures.
Yeah, so I've tried a variety of builds with Thoughtseize or Abrupt Decay or Path to Exile, and I eventually decided that it wasn't worth it. It was diluting the power of Court of Calling and Collected Company too much, and I think in Modern, at least in game ones, you want your deck to be as proactive and abstractly powerful as it can be, and not try to metagame too much or worry about too many things that could happen. There is one Fiend Hunter that you can chord for in dire situations, but outside of that, there's no removal spells, and the goal is to just come out blazing and have as many pieces to find off of Collected Company and Court of Calling as you can.
Yeah, last thing you want is to Collected Company when you need just some sort of power on the board and end up whiffing or only just hitting like 1 out of the 6 cards.
Yeah, if you cast Collected Company and it's like land, Collected Company, Path to Exile, Thoughtseize, land, you're just like, why are these cards in my deck?
And last edition here in your main deck, you've got Gavany Township, which is a card that just really allows these decks to grind out wins. And Horizon Canopy, kind of a new addition you've added that gives you some late game value.
Yeah, so Gavany Township is a great way in matchups such as Jund or Abzan, where it's really hard to combo them. They have so much removal and they have Scavenging Ooze to interrupt it. But between Collected Company and Court of Calling, you do flood the board with a lot of creatures, and Gavany Township lets you turn those creatures into powerful threats that can just overwhelm them. And then Horizon Canopy as well is another way to prevent flooding out. Only 22 lands in the deck, so there's not a lot of lands, but there are 9 mana creatures. And flooding out is a real problem for the deck. You really have only 8 big payoff spells in Collected Company and Chord, and so having access to a land that also turns into a card later in the game really just helps keep the gas flowing throughout the game and make sure you're not flooding out.
Yeah, an interesting thing you brought up about Gavany Township, how you can kind of beat the Jund decks and stuff by just kind of going wide. Brad Rutherford, who won the Premier IQ with like one of these early versions of this deck, mentioned that Modern just isn't a format where a lot of people are going wide, and this deck is one of those that does allow you to do that.
Yeah, and Modern's also a format where there's not a lot of board sweepers. Pyroclasm's a commonly played one in some of the combo decks, like Tron or Amulet, but outside of that, people really aren't sweeping the board that much, so there's really very little downside to just flooding the board with creatures. And sometimes you have 8 creatures and they're all 1, 2, or 0 power, but if you draw a Township, it's very fast clock.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of your troublesome matchups, and we'll go into the sideboard to do that. These big mana decks seem to be a problem, and we've just seen the invitational results, Tron and Amulet kind of popping up there. You have a full 4 Fulminator Mage here on the board to combat those.
Yeah, so Tron and Amulet are just 2 of the worst matchups for the deck, and they're also very popular decks right now. For a while, I toyed with playing things like Fulminators in the main deck to combat them, but eventually I decided that I'm just going to hope to avoid those matchups and just accept that I'm going to lose game 1 and then sideboard into all these super hateful creatures that you can hit off a Collected Company and Court of Calling, like Fulminator Mage and Tidehollow Sculler.
Yeah. Sculler just being very powerful, being a clock in itself and disrupting them at the same time.
Yeah, against a lot of these decks, they're not like they're trying to do their own thing, and they're kind of ignoring what you're doing. So Sculler is going to stay in play a lot. It's basically just Thoughtseize on a stick that actually kills them. Especially against decks like Tron, it's actually really hard to combo them because they have Relic of Progenitus to break up the combo. So it's important to be able to take like their payoff spell or their ramp spell, depending on what part of the game it is, but also have a creature that can kill them, because it's going to be really hard to win with an infinite combo.
Sure. Also got some Abrupt Decays here, very helpful in the twin matchup, I assume. And Stony Silence. Talk about these cards.
Stony Silence is a deck that doesn't really fit the theme. It's not something you can find off of Collected Company or Court of Calling. You might think that Kataki is actually a better choice because it is a creature that you can hit off those cards that's really good against Affinity. But I actually have Stony Silence on my board for Tron, not for Affinity.
Okay.
It just happens to also be good against Affinity. Stony Silence is there because it shuts off Relic of Progenitus, Expedition Map, Chromatic Star, and Chromatic Sphere, and Oblivion Stone. It really just slows their deck down so much. And since Tron is one of the worst matchups and a deck I expect to be popular, I decided that I was going to dedicate 2 more slots in my sideboard for it.
Yeah, I noticed you don't really have like the Burn Tin Forge Tinder, tutor up spell, which is kind of good against the Pyroclasm effects, but you're going with Stony Silence as a way, if you can just get out ahead of them, they just don't get to use their spells.
Exactly, and sometimes they can't cast Pyroclasm if you have a Stony Silence in play. They're going to rely on cards like Chromatic Sphere, Chromatic Star to be able to cast it.
Okay. You got another Scavenging Ooze, which of course is good in the mirror and all the matchups we discussed before. Revelark's pretty sweet in here. Break it down, because I feel like in a lot of matchups where they're disrupting your graveyard, Revelark's not that great, but where exactly is the card coming in?
Revelark is an absolute all-star against a lot of the fair decks like Jund and Abzan. When they don't have a Scavenging Ooze, then it really just wrecks them. You can basically, the common thing I like to do with Revelark is I'll Chord for an Eternal Witness to get back Chord, Chord for an Eternal Witness, get back Chord, and then Chord for Revelark and get back both my Eternal Witnesses that have died. And you just grind them out that way, and it's really hard for them to beat that. They do have Scavenging Ooze to disrupt it, but between the Abrupt Decays and the path that you side in, you have ways to deal with those.
Sure. You got Kasali Primage in here as well. Helpful to just troublesome artifacts and enchantments.
Yeah, there's a lot of matchups where you really need it. There's cards like Rest in Peace, Knight of Souls Betrayal, things like that people bring in. Just having access to that's really important. Jerry's
been kind of hitting us from all angles with the Jund deck with the Black Leyline as well. Another card you might need to be able to target.
Yeah, Black Leyline, it's actually weird that Pride Mage is actually a good card against Jund, but it is because of Black Leyline and also Knight of Souls Betrayal.
All right, well, you've been putting a lot of work into the deck. We've seen you play it at the Invitational, IQs, all that. You've got a pretty good run going with it. We wish you the best of luck here at the Grand Prix. Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all weekend long for the action here in Charlotte.